Welcome to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Centre podcast. Each episode, we'll bring you insights from our expert counselors and tips and strategies to improve your mental well-being. I'm your host, Katherine Hurtig. Calgary Counseling Centre and Counseling Alberta provide effective counseling for anyone in Alberta with no waitlist and no financial barriers. Find us online at calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. In this episode, I talk with Sarah Rosenfeld, registered social worker, all about anxiety, what it looks and feels like, how it can impact the different areas of our lives, how to manage it, and how to reframe our mindset around worry. So we are talking about anxiety. And to start off, how would you define that? How would you kind of frame what anxiety is?
Well, anxiety takes people in directions probably that they don't necessarily want to go in, and it can really hijack people, unfortunately. It's almost a situation where people start to lose a little bit of their ability to navigate, to feel like they can be in control and adapt to their situations. So I'd say it shows up quite differently for people. Some people have physical symptoms, right? Somatic experiences, heart racing, palpitations, shortness of breath. For other people, it's primarily like their cognitions and how they're thinking, or the pacing of their thoughts, or the quality of their thinking. So they could have racing thoughts or things that really don't make sense that they attach meaning to or significance to, and that leads to more and increased anxiety.
Yeah.
For other people, it's in their social connections or lack thereof. People talk often about social anxiety. Social anxiety is really that overestimation of the risk when they're interacting in social situations that then reduce their ability to connect and get the benefit from what that social contact can be for many of us. But if you're really worried about how people will respond to you.
So it's more than just worry, it's bigger than that.
It can be. I mean, for some people, it will look like worry, but for some people, it can really begin to be something that takes over a lot more in their lives. And so the world that they had that might have been previously a bit more expansive has become a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller. And because it happens incrementally, you don't always notice the change.
Yeah.
Until maybe sometimes people say to you, have you noticed that you're not doing the things you once did, or we miss you, or it's harder to connect with you. So sometimes it's hard for the person experiencing anxiety to notice those changes.
Now, you talked about social interaction. Are there common things or common triggers that can, I want to say cause, but maybe that's not the right word, but can...
So, I think I kind of know where you're going with this. So I think one of the things that's important to remember about anxiety, or one of the hallmarks about anxiety, is that it's quite difficult because life has so many pieces to it that can be unpredictable.
Right.
So what happens oftentimes is that people who are wanting to alleviate their anxiety are looking for reassurance. They're looking to know that things will be okay. And so instead of being able to say, okay, what are the pieces that are actually things that I can manage, control, develop skills around, and then what are the other pieces that are not things that I can deal with, they have a hard time making that distinction. So it all just becomes really overwhelming and then leads to more overwhelm. And so I hope I've answered your question there. If I haven't, please ask it again.
Yeah, for sure.
But that's really, I think, what happens. So it kind of has this snowball effect of something that might have started out initially as fairly small, then can lead to bigger and bigger things, because it's hard for a person who's anxious to seek that reassurance, because sometimes we just have to learn how to manage that uncertainty and discomfort, get to the other side of that and look back and go, okay, what did I learn from that? And
for sure. And like you said, manage that uncertainty, because uncertainty is not really something that we do have much control over. Unpredictable things are always going to happen.
And being able to be nimble and be able to navigate really helps to kind of calm that anxiety down a little bit. It's always there to some degree, but we want to keep it in a range where it feels manageable. It feels like you can work through it. You know where to go, you know who to talk to, and you have some skills and a toolbox essentially to be able to navigate it.
So what are some misconceptions that you've heard about anxiety?
I think there's a couple of them. One of the things that I would say is that, right, if you have a thought in your head that's anxious, there's a misconception that you need to believe that that thought's accurate and true. It may or may not be. So it's helpful to kind of figure out, like, is this thought have any validity to it? Or what are the things that I need to do to kind of look at that, explore it, maybe digest it, reconsider it? So I think that's a bit of a misconception. I think there's also a misconception that, you know, I can handle this on my own. I don't need to go and ask for any help around it. What we do know is that sometimes it is really helpful to get a way of discussing, talking about these things with other people, whether that's a skilled and trained professional, whether that's somebody you trust in your social support network, whether it's taking a course. Those things all really help us have a different experience of our relationship with anxiety and can lead to shifting our orientation and relationship to it.
And like you said, if it's a thought that we're having that might not necessarily be true, hearing a different perspective, whether that's from a professional or friend, like you said, that can kind of help shift things, right?
Absolutely. And then, I think the other piece is, there's a misconception that it won't really matter what I do. And actually that can be further from the truth. And sometimes it's the smallest things that make the biggest difference. Often it's the small little things that add up over time that make a big difference.
Yeah. So what are some of those small things that people can build on to help with anxiety?
So one of the big things would be just taking a breath, taking a minute, calming yourself down, leaving the environment that you're in, going to have a glass of water, maybe even taking a walk around the block and coming back to it and saying, okay, can I look at this with a different set of eyes? So when you shift that focus and attention, it often shifts your relationship to the anxiety or the thing that's causing the anxiety. And anxiety is often caused by our perceptions or worries about what other people will think of us. It's much more about what's out of our control than what's within our control.
Mm-hmm.
So when we focus too much on the other, we're less able to be agile and adapt to what's in front of us. So little things, taking a walk, having a glass of water, just reaching out to a friend, not even maybe talking about the anxiety, but just saying, hey, what are your plans for the weekend? Looking at photographs, that sometimes photographs bring us to that place that we love so much, right? Or that image takes us to a place where we feel that calm and sense of relax, and then we can calmly return to something and focus and reattend to it.
You had first mentioned, taking a breath, and I've heard a lot about breathing and, it's kind of connection with anxiety. Like we have a heightened, breathing rate when we're anxious, and how if we focus on slowing that down, that can really, that can have a positive effect.
I think breathing, what's so great about breathing, Catherine, is it's portable. It doesn't require a lot of resources. You can do it anywhere. You can do it at home. You can do it at work. You can do it when you're on an airplane. You can do it, commuting. So that's, I think, why it's a really useful one, because you can take it with you. You can use it at any time. So it's that reattuning to something that's now within your control. You can actually control the breath. You can breathe in for 3 breaths, hold it for 3 breaths, and breathe out for 3 breaths. You can do that as many times as you want to. You can stop doing that and return to it. So it really takes it from being out of your control to something that you can manage, which then will help reduce. You talked about the somatic changes, right? The breathing will slow.
Right.
Be able to, notice your pulse is probably shifting to being a little bit less heightened.
And physiologically, doesn't that kind of like when you work on slowing your breath, slowing your heart rate, doesn't that kind of tell your brain that you're not in danger? Isn't there some kind of connection there?
Yeah, it helps us use our parasympathetic nervous system, which is that relaxation response.
Okay.
And so you're right, it activates that to then calm the nervous system down and allows us to go, okay, yeah, this is okay. There isn't any major thing happening here. I can manage this. I can handle this. And that would also go hand in hand with being able to actually start to assess risk differently. Because often people with anxiety will overestimate the amount of risk and not recognize that there are things that are actually within their power and control to do something about.
Yeah.
So breathing is a great practice to be able to just, as you say, calm the body down and calm the thoughts.
When you're working with clients, what are some ways that you work with them on ways to manage anxiety, to tackle it?
Great question. So I think one of the things that we want to help people understand is that anxiety is going to be there. And so it's not about trying to minimize it entirely. It's about shifting our focus to say, absolutely, when I'm doing something new or uncomfortable or unfamiliar, that it's going to be there. To anticipate that anxiety is going to be a companion on this journey that we're going on, but also to re-envision what that anxiety is about, right? It's an unfamiliar experience. It doesn't mean that it's a dangerous or scary or unattainable experience. It's that I'm going to anticipate that this anxiety is going to come up because this is something new, and be prepared that that's going to happen. And then being able to say, okay, so this is there, this is present. What are the steps that I can take towards moving away from the anxiety and into an actual experience that will potentially transform our relationship to what we were worried about? So it's really about being able to notice and attend and attune to the fact that we have that, but then having strategies to be able to navigate it, because anxiety can actually paint us into a corner. And what we want to do is work with it in a different way and see this as an opportunity. So you might say I have anxiety and that's crippling and it's difficult, but it could also be that it's exciting and new and unfamiliar.
Yeah, so it's about shifting your mindset.
Exactly. So, right, anybody that does something new, there's going to be some anxiety around that. That's okay.
Of course.
How do we then say, right, I want to work with this. I want to learn from this. I want to adapt and evolve, because really life is about a learning opportunity if we allow ourselves to be in that mindset.
So in my own counseling experience around anxiety, a phrase that I really liked was that, with anxiety, we overestimate the risk and underestimate our ability to handle it.
Absolutely. I would say that's incredibly accurate. So you will perceive risk everywhere when you're anxious, and you want to do what you can to avoid risk. Well, risk is a big part of just being human, but part of it is having scalable risk. So is that presentation really the risk that you think it is? It's not the same as being asked or being called to defend your country because you're at war. Those things are very, very different, but the body might respond and your brain might respond to those being equally risky.
Yeah,
what you want to be able to do with anxiety is be able to say that risk about public speaking, while it seems scary and having this strong response, the risk is not the same as something that would potentially cause me actual harm.
Of course. And then how do you work with clients on building up that confidence in their ability to handle the risks or the worries or the anxiety?
Yeah, that's also a great question. One of the things that really helps with anxiety is being able to experientially shift what we know about anxiety. So when I work with people that are talking about anxiety, it's a lot about, okay, the thing that's really worrying you, how do we break that down into little pieces that we can work on, that I can support alongside, but it's really about equipping them to be able to go out and do that thing that scares them so much. So we break it down into a set of steps and sequences, and then it's about being able to go out, experiment. I ask them to do some reflection. We bring it back, have a conversation around it about their learning, about their new learning primarily, because there's going to be new learning that comes out of this, and things that surprised that they were fully not anticipating. Wow, that person that I went up to and talked to, they were really nice to me. I was anticipating they were going to be mean and rude. It can be really small things that make a massive difference in people's experience of anxiety and the overestimation of risk that you talked about, and the underestimation of our ability to handle it.
And so the more we do those things, the more we kind of, face those fears, face those anxieties. Does it get easier?
I don't know if the answer would be that it's easier, or that we just know how to navigate the uncertainty differently.
Right.
There's always going to be new things. So it's maybe not that it's always easier, but we feel better equipped to handle it. We know that if we
more confident. Yeah.
we know that if we try this strategy, we break it down into smaller pieces, we adjust our thinking around it, we can get through it and we can manage it. The goal ultimately is to actually enjoy that process, actually enjoy being in the uncertainty and not be so invested in the outcome. But that takes lots of practice and lots of trust in yourself and recognition that really the act in and of itself is where we do the learning.
So like from your example with public speaking, so it's not like that is going to suddenly become not scary. It's just you will, correct me if I'm wrong, so you'll kind of be able to approach that more confidently. Is that right?
Exactly. And say, yeah, I want to, during this public speaking, I want to make sure that I'm really clear about the ideas I'm presenting, or I want to make sure that I really tell this story extremely well. It's not that you're going in with no anxiety, because we all want to be liked. We all want to do a good job. So anxiety comes with that territory to some degree, but we are reevaluating the benefit that this could have to us in a different way. It's not just about that fear of failure. It's about, okay, now maybe maybe that's still there a little bit, but those other things might take more importance and then shift the experience for us. That's always my hope, that it shifts the experience for people of, wow, I learned something, or that comment that somebody made was, wow, I really appreciated that feedback.
Yeah. Sarah, can you talk about the role of like mindfulness and meditation in managing anxiety?
Sure. So mindfulness and meditation is really that ability to refocus our attention and learn how, when things are busy, to find calm at some points. So as things and the progress and the pace of things increases, it gets harder and harder sometimes for people to find that ability to take a moment, be able to reflect, be able to calm. So mindfulness is really about that attunement. It's about helping the brain be able to go to this different state of focus with more ease. And that's why it needs to be, or we encourage people to have it as a practice, because it's really hard to get to that place. You might be able to do it once, but to be able to consistently be able to do that, it needs to be a practice. And it's not to say that you don't have thoughts coming back and forth. It's just about that refocus. And I'm going to come back to this. Even though I have these fleeting things, you don't get distracted by the fact that that's happening. You're able to say, no, I just want to attend. I want to attend. I want to attune. So it's really being able to prime ourselves to figure out how to do that more consistently.
And that consistency and doing those things over time, how does that benefit? What kind of changes can someone expect?
Calmer, clearer thinking, more positive outlook, being able to, as we talked about earlier, assess risk appropriately. Okay, yeah, that's something that I'm worried about, but I also know I've prepared for this and I'll do the best that I can and we'll see what happens, versus what we might have previously thought if we haven't been in a mindfulness practice or that focusing of our attention.
Well, that all sounds good.
Yeah, it's not for everybody. For some people, it's through spirituality, through artistic pursuits, being in nature. It doesn't always have to be this formalized practice, but it's also recognizing for yourself, when are you able to be in a state where you're right? You have clarity of thinking. You're able to enjoy what you're doing. Time might be passing and you're enjoying the activity. What actual things are you doing? Because that probably allows you to gain access to that place more easily if you know what you're doing, who you're doing it with, and what you're actually doing at that time.
Right. And I guess that's going to be the case with any kind of mental health, treatment, any kind of mental health concern, anxiety, depression, whatever. There's some things that are going to work for someone and some things that are not. And you kind of got to, would you say that it's a bit of a trial and error to find what works for you?
Absolutely. So just because your neighbor likes to do 10-kilometer runs doesn't mean that's the form of exercise that's going to work for you. What do you like? Do you like to be in water? Do you like it to be more spiritual? Maybe yoga is more what you want. Really, it's about taking the principle of movement and figuring out what are the ways you enjoy moving your body and what sometimes it's rigorous activity, sometimes it's less rigorous. It's not about having to be like other people. It's about exploring and being willing and curious enough to figure out what fits best for you. And that's always the challenge, because often people want a prescription of if you do this, things will get better. But really it's through the exercise of trying things on, seeing what you like, that you can start to recognize, oh, I really enjoy this. And when I'm doing this, time passes and it's pleasurable. Do something that you like. You're more likely to do it again if it's something you enjoy.
Of course. And speaking of exercise, can that, like exercise and physical activity, can that play a role in anxiety management?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the most helpful strategies for anxiety management.
Is it?
So exercise can be really helpful because it actually diverts us from the things that's causing us anxiety. So it's a diversion strategy. So that can be really useful. When we're exercising, we're actually doing things that relax our body. So it will actually reduce muscle tension, reduce any other forms of tension in the body. It can really help regulate our breathing. So that can help with the reduction of anxiety symptoms. When you actually get your heart rate moving, right? When blood is flowing in a different way, it increases anti-anxiety neurochemicals, actually, including serotonin, right? That are positive in counteracting anxiety. So it helps, again, with that calming and regulating of the body. And it activates the parts of our brain that are involved in executive functioning. So are reacting to real or perceived threats to our survival. So it helps calibrate that more effectively so we can perceive risk more appropriately. And it's more to what the actual risk is.
And I think we really underestimate how our mind and body, like we underestimate how connected they are and how taking care of ourselves physically, you know, in all the ways that, you know, we've heard a million times, like through physical activity and a proper diet and sleep, how that can actually, like, just getting those basics right, have like a significant impact on our mood.
It's a huge impact. And again, it's people struggle with the consistency of it. That's the hardest part.
It is. Yeah.
When things are tough, that's when people stop doing the things that are most helpful. And then they look back and say why that was a difficult period. It probably was a more difficult period because you stopped drinking water, you stopped walking around the block, you stopped getting up and doing your exercise in the morning. So stress level increases and the ability to manage that stress decreases because the things you turn to weren't there to get you through a stressful time. We end up increasing stress levels. So it's a bit, right? We don't turn to the things that are super helpful when we're in heightened states of stress. And those are the times we need it most.
How can someone kind of recognize in themselves when their anxiety is becoming like too much to handle and it's something that they can't manage on their own anymore? And they should probably reach out for help. What does that look like? What's that gonna feel like? What signs in their life are gonna be there that, you know, are gonna say, I should get some help?
You're worried about interactions with colleagues. You're afraid to say the wrong thing at the wrong time. That's a constant, persistent thought that you're always having. It holds you back from being able to engage in opportunities. So you're not able to read a room and say, this is a place where I could make a contribution. You're so overwhelmed with your thoughts that it just holds you back and you can't actually accurately determine if it would be worthwhile making a comment or not. You were involved in some kind of regular activity, whether it was going to the gym, being on a recreational sports team, and gradually you've stopped attending those things. So at first it was just infrequently, then it became a consistent pattern, and now you're feeling overwhelmed about the thought of having to go back and what everybody's going to think and if you're going to be judged. So those could be hallmarks of your anxiety becoming unmanageable. You have commitments that you're backing out of regularly. You're not being genuine about the reasons for why you can't attend things. You're too busy, but really you're not allowing for that connection with another person to say, look, I'm struggling, where there's an opportunity for them to say, hey, I'm here, I could listen. So you're just automatically taking yourself out of interactions because you assume you know how they're going to play out or that you don't have anything to offer. So those would be some examples of, if that's happening persistently, you're probably needing to have some help and some support from other people.
Yeah. So if we're struggling with anxiety, what's a good step forward? How can we set realistic expectations and focus on progress over perfection to kind of help us manage our anxiety?
So I think this is a really important one, Catherine, because anxiety often has perfectionism connected to it.
Oh, does it?
From what I've seen when
Yeah.
I've with people that have anxiety, there's this, it has to be done just so. So it's not about doing it better each and every time. There's a thing or a way of doing it that's the only indicator that I've been successful. So that takes you away from the learning that could happen at any point along the way, because unless you hit that mark, you've been a complete failure. But as we know, in anything that we do, being able to attain that is quite difficult and challenging and may actually be unattainable.
And that's just the idea of success that we've set up in our own minds, right? That's not anyone else saying this is what needs to happen. Yeah.
Exactly. So when you have a perfectionist way of looking at things, the unfortunate thing about that is it's about pleasing others that may or may not have that expectation. It's not about what we're doing or how we're growing or adapting. Mm-hmm. So what I try to help people talk about, and you said it, is progress. What are the little things that you modified or changed once you realized you did something and you wanted to do it a little bit differently next time? So that could be so many things. An interaction with your child, you had an idea of what you wanted to do, you tried it out, maybe they got upset with you. Instead of saying the whole thing didn't work out, well, you took that opportunity to go and step into something that was unknown. Then you figured out what information was helpful, what information may have been less helpful, and you allowed yourself time to think, okay, I think I did an okay job, and how could I do it differently? If other people are around when that interaction's happening, it's always great to ask them for feedback, because we're not always the best gauge of how we've done something. It'd be better to say if there's, another parent around, how do you think that went? Well, I think you did this pretty well, but when he started to push back, you got really upset. And I think that's where things went off the rails a bit. But up until that point, you were pretty calm and regulated. He was listening. I wonder what happened to you in that moment. Can we can you look at that maybe and see what could have done differently? So that's not the whole interaction. It's right. There were parts of it that were strong and parts of it that were less strong. That's about progress. That's not perfect.
So if someone has that, the tendency to be a perfectionist, how do you work with them to kind of move to the idea that those small wins are just as valuable? Do you know what I mean?
That's when I'm pretty targeted about the things I want them to do between our session times. I'll actually say, I want you to go out and have 3 interactions with your child. You can think of the times when you want to do it, but I want to hear from you next time about how did they each go, and I'm going to ask for specific feedback from them about what they actually noticed.
Okay.
So I would be, again, what I'm trying to elicit there is that you want to be actually giving people an opportunity to go out and experiment and try things versus having an idea in their head of what it's like. And that's just one example. It could be something in the workplace. It could be something, right? They've wanted to go to this bookstore because they want to, talk to the person at the cash that they think is really sweet, but they haven't had the chance to do it. So that might be something that I'd say, okay, could you just go in there and buy a book and smile at them and see how that goes? And then it might be trying to do something a little bit more brave and courageous, but you want to be doing it.
Yeah, kind of one step at a time.
One step at a time. Yeah.
Sarah, is there anything we haven't touched on, anything you think people really need to know about anxiety and, things that they can do to kind of manage it on their own?
I would just invite anybody who's listening to this to really think about anxiety as an opportunity. It really is a way for you to learn different things about yourself. There are many people, famous, not known to us, that deal with anxiety and end up achieving fantastic things. So it's not about you thinking there's something wrong with you. It's about this is a gift that you've been given or a way that you interact with things. How do you learn to harness that, to make it work for you, to benefit you? There's lots of things that come with being anxious that we might perceive as not so helpful, but it can also harness us to do amazing things. So I just would really encourage and invite people to think about things a little differently, that there's an opportunity here, that there's people willing to help, that care deeply about wanting to work with you and work through things with you, that there's people in your world that care about you, and that you're more than the self-limiting beliefs that you have in your head. You're way more than that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That's such an important message. And I know that, with my own experience with anxiety, that mind shift has been really important, to not really think of it as, something I need to get rid of or change completely. It's just approaching it differently. And like you said, it's just, I'm interacting with the world. I'm thinking about it in just a different way. So thank you so much for the chat today.
You are very welcome. It was a great opportunity to reflect on this and talk to you about it.
You've been listening to Living Fully, a Calgary Counseling Centre podcast. Thank you for tuning in. This episode was produced by Nick here, Louisa Campos, and by me, Katherine Hurtig. A special thanks to Sarah Rosenfeld. To stay up to date on our latest episodes, be sure to subscribe. We're available in your favorite podcast app. Living Fully is a production of Calgary Counseling Centre and recorded in Calgary on Treaty 7 territory. Living Fully podcast is not a substitute or alternative for professional care or treatment. If you're in Alberta and need help, please go to calgarycounseling.com or counselingalberta.com. For help across Canada and the United States, call 211. If you are outside of Canada and the US, seek help from your general medical practitioner.